Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you for being with us today. We are broadcasting live from New York City. Warren, where are you? Warren, are you in New York City also?
I'm in New Jersey today. Sorry, Arthur.
So New Jersey, New York City, and outside of Tampa, Florida, where I am. And I know that many of you know that I've been here for a while. Thank you all for spending some time with us this afternoon. You're also welcome to be here. And I have to tell you, over a cocktail at not only do I miss Don Perbetti, who's on the call and arranged all this for us today, but I miss having cocktails at the Baccarat, which I hope to do soon. So if any of you would like me to buy cocktails at the Baccarat when I'm in the city, that invitation is wide open. And even if you tried to pay the bill while I was there, they wouldn't let you. So Don and I become friendly. We've known each other actually through friends for quite some time. And he's a senior experienced person, and you'll see why in a minute. His affiliation with ACE IT Solutions was timely and appropriate because they do a lot of work with family offices and cybersecurity threats and thwarting those threats, among other things. So the intent of today's discussion is to talk about what exactly ACE IT Solutions does and how it may apply and help you in your respective businesses. We're recording this for the record. We're going to be posting on the Family Office Insights YouTube channel in a day or two. And also you can use it as a method of reviewing if you care to, or if there's anybody in your network that would benefit from hearing about it, they can view it there. And of course, we're going to put you in direct contact with Don and Warren post webinar. So a little housekeeping for Zoom. As you know, we can't see or hear you, but we are most welcoming any of your questions in the chat box or the Q&A, and please feel free. All questions are welcome. Don's going to have a presentation, then we'll address those as we go along after that. So again, thank you for spending your afternoon with us here for an hour. And with that, I'm going to introduce Warren. Warren, take it from here. Welcome.
Thank you, Arthur, for allowing us to participate today. Great introduction. Welcome, everyone. I am Warren Finkel, one of the founders of ACE IT Solutions and managing partner. I am excited that everyone can join us today. Thanks again for setting time out of your busy schedules this afternoon to attend this event while we provide an overview on the cybersecurity landscape, identify some of the key issues and challenges facing family offices in the world today. We will define the terminology everyone continues to hear, including the bad actors, what is behind them and who they may be, what is ransomware, malware, phishing, our strategies we use to protect and defend, and the tactical approaches we use with our client base today. Some history of ACE IT. We founded the company in November of 2009. We provide outsourced IT and cybersecurity services from a 24/7 help desk to monitoring and managing our clients' networks to office buildouts, cloud migrations to Azure and AWS, and Office 365. We deliver white glove services to over 250 satisfied clients and over 5,000 users. Our client base is mostly made up of financial service firms, including family offices, hedge funds, private equity, investment banks, and broker-dealers. We work with major banks as referral partners and some of the larger accounting firms that refer us to their clients, namely family offices. Our mission statement when we started in 2009 to now is the same. We help companies solve their IT challenges and protect their users and infrastructure from cyber threats and risks. I will now hand it over to Don Perbetti, our Global Director of Business Development, who will start with the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Arthur, thank you for setting this up. Thanks to you and your team. And Warren, thank you for the handover. I think before I begin the presentation, it's appropriate for me to give a little background on myself. I'm going to date myself a little here, but I ran commodity operations for firms like DLJ and First Boston. I spent a little over 9 years at Reuters. I helped start one of the first foreign exchange trading systems for Reuters. From there, I went on to help start and create an entity that provided technology outsourcing and corporate governance to 300 hedge fund, fund-to-fund, and private equity firms. And then I started my own LLP for the last 8 years prior to joining ACE, where I provided business advisory services, things like real estate, technology, software, vendor selection, things that help provide a hedge fund, a family office with sustainable business infrastructure, things that help provide and attract and retain assets and mitigate operational risk like cybersecurity. So it's a pleasure to now be represented with ACE and the full suite of services that we provide the family office space. So thank you very much for joining us. Today, what I'd like to cover is on a macro level, we'll be talking a little bit about some of the very real threats and challenges that family office firms are facing, why some family office firms have been slow to embrace these challenges, what nefarious groups or bad actors are perpetrating these threats, and also how they're becoming more sophisticated, why family offices are being targeted specifically, and the types of threats that are being really exploited: ransomware, social media, and phishing. More importantly, how to create a top-down culture on a strategic level. And then my colleague, Warren, will take the second half of the presentation and we'll discuss on a more tactical level what defense in-depth methodologies can best be deployed to combat family office threats and how to create a strong, proactive security posture. So I want to preface my presentation just by mentioning this one thing. I realize much of the information that will be covered today should come with a deeper explanation, but out of respect for your time, Warren and I will make ourselves available to speak offline to answer any and all questions. Also, given our experience in serving family offices and understanding their need for complete discretion and confidentiality, we'll set up a one-on-one sidebar conversation for those questions you have that you do not wish to share in an open forum. Further, we'd be happy to provide any NDAs prior to those discussions. Our objective is really to leave you with a solution set that can be implemented to provide countermeasures and preemptive threat mitigation to help combat specific threats to family offices and preserve multi-generational wealth, and more importantly, your family brand. So let's begin. On a macro level, if you think about the terrorism landscape, there's no longer just physical, it's now virtual. This is only exacerbated with COVID. This is only exacerbated with COVID requiring all of us to conduct business in a new virtual dynamic. The pandemic has had a dramatic effect on almost every aspect of business and life. It's exposed the growing digital divide, shifted some priorities, amplified many of the challenges that the family offices faced prior to COVID-19, such as the importance of data backup, disaster recovery, business continuity planning, and basic cybersecurity protections. Due to the pandemic, remote computer use today creates far more endpoints of vulnerability than ever before. As firms try to figure out how to best deal with a remote workforce, hackers are quickly mobilizing and stepping up their attacks, while at the same time, the attack vectors are becoming more complex and more sophisticated. Many family offices have the wealth commensurate with a small and medium-sized enterprise, but typically they don't have the same governance requirements and therefore do not put the same levels of security in place, making them lucrative targets for hackers. Unfortunately, the idea that only large corporations and governments are at risk for cyber attacks is prevalent, and it's not accurate. This lack of preparation makes family offices an easy target when compared to other institutions or businesses. To illustrate my point, I'm going to share some just basic empirical data to drive home the point. Cyber threats, as per Forbes, are the #2 risk to family offices after investment portfolio risk. Operational risk and reputational risk is the third biggest. They are both inextricably linked to cybersecurity. Equally, a week ago Sunday, the chair of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, just said on 60 Minutes a week ago that cyber threats were the biggest threat to our economy. There's an old saying, if you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office. Everyone I have worked with is uniquely different. There's no one size fits all solution. Every family office has a unique ecosystem that is unique to them. Warren and I have both worked with single family offices that employ as many as 30 to 40 in-house specialists and as few as one with an office manager. At one end of the spectrum, these offices are largely administrative and serve as a point to manage various outsourced service providers and maintain a clear picture of the wealth management framework. At the other end, they have teams of in-house experts that work solely for family on all aspects of investment, wealth management, and operations. Clearly, they have very different needs. In my experience, SFOs typically have a large attack surface as a result of devices that are frequently spread out across multiple residences, boats, planes, or various entities. Additionally, they commonly rely on third-party and trusted employees who store significant information about family members in disparate systems like email, chat, and other internet-connected services. So if you think about the family office footprint, there are many areas of data to protect, which make family offices a honeypot for bad actors. Think about some of the data sets that a typical mid-sized family office might have: portfolio allocation, specific investment strategies, record keeping and reporting, tax planning, trust and estates planning, general administration, family governance and risk management, philanthropy, concierge and travel information, third-party information. There are more malicious actors around the world that see opportunities for profit and blackmail in small financial firms, and in particular, family offices. The landscape of threat actors include cyber criminals whose objective may be to steal the money or information for commercial gain, nation states that may acquire information to advance national objectives, and hacktivists whose objectives may be to secure compromising information to disrupt and embarrass an entity and blackmail that person for personal gain. Attackers, are the tools are available to them, are increasingly sophisticated. Insider threats, too, are something to keep an eye on. So please note that that is a concern. In order to understand how to best protect their infrastructure and sensitive data, family offices need to learn more about the threat landscape and what a hacker is after. So in terms of cyber criminals becoming more sophisticated, you have to understand the landscape that they now have access to. If you look at IoT, that refers to the Internet of Things, which describes network of physical objects, things or objects that are embedded with sensors, software, and other technologies for the purpose of connecting and exchanging data with other devices and systems over the internet. Things have evolved due to the convergence of multiple technologies, real-time analytics, machine learning, commodity sensors, and embedded systems. Some traditional fields of embedded systems include wireless sensor network controls, automation, including home and building automation, and others all contribute to the enabling of the Internet of Things, but it also provides a much wider footprint for attackers to target. There are a number of serious concerns about dangers in the growth of IoT, especially in the areas of privacy and security, and consequently, industry and governmental moves to address these concerns have begun, including the development of international standards. But one common theme that begins to emerge is clear. Technical controls cannot mitigate all these threats. Family offices must deploy a top-down culture of compliance, security awareness, and remediation as an essential countermeasure to combat these threats. Family office firms and the people and administrators that run them are some of the smartest people I've had the pleasure of working with. However, I think you will agree with me when I say family offices tend to embrace change cautiously, and I say that in the most respectful way. In addition, since firms have taken an a la carte approach to technology deployment, as they may have disparate systems, they are not uniform across the firm, which further extends their vulnerabilities. Hackers are like water. They find the path of least resistance. Those with the easiest perimeter to penetrate, with the high upside in assets and reputational risk, are key targets. However, family office firms with a defense in depth methodology have a strong security culture, which is supported by the top down, can make it very hard on a hacker, and they would prefer to prey on the more vulnerable. Now, what are some of the reasons family offices were resistant to change? Please let me know if any of these sound familiar to you. We're too small to be hacked. No other family offices I know have been breached. It will never happen to us. Well, let me dispel some of these common misconceptions. The reality is hackers are increasingly looking at smaller victims that may not have a sophisticated defense. 28% of family office firms have already been hacked. About 31% of reported breaches involve companies with fewer than 100 people. No other family offices I know have been breached. It will never happen to me. Well, the reality is that security lapses at other private funds go significantly underreported. As we all know, family office firms cherish privacy. The reality is many family office firms have absorbed substantial costs from a cyber attack without making a claim in hopes of minimizing the fallout of operational investment and also reputational risk. There are hundreds of millions in damages that go unreported. Adding to the vulnerability we see in our own portfolio of clients is that many family offices have CFOs, and the CFO has multiple responsibilities. They wear multiple hats. They become the COO, the CTO, the CCO, and they're spread very thin. So many decisions for technology falls on the CFO. For many family offices and multifamily offices, technology is something of an afterthought. So the other question that I hear a lot and that Warren and I hear on a fairly consistent basis is, our security person's on top of this. Well, how do you know? And I would add something called trust but verify. I'm going to ask a number of questions to you from a technology perspective. You let me know if you know the answers to these questions. How is your corporate VPN secured? Are your current employees accessing data through unsecured wireless networks at home? Can you ensure you're getting the latest Windows security updates for your corporate and home computers? How are your computers protected? Do you have antivirus, malware, endpoint protection, hard drive encryption in place with regular updates? Are accounts locked after a set number of failed login attempts? For how long? How do you handle password resets or account lockouts? Does your family office have a multi-factor authentication for all corporate network access? If you don't have MFA, you'll have difficulty getting cyber insurance. Do you use encrypted email for wire transfers for critical information? Is mobile device management used? Are minimum security controls enforced on all mobile devices? Are controls in place to prevent employees from sending attachments or data to their personal email accounts? Do you lock down USB ports? How are security events, incidents, alerts managed? Do you have a SOC or a SIM? A SOC is a security operations center, and a SIM is a systems information event management system that makes it difficult for penetration to exist before it becomes discovered. Do you have monitoring tools to determine when or if your domain has been accessed on the dark web? Do you have immediate access to all of your system passwords? This is something that Warren and I have experienced fairly consistently as we transition certain firms from other entities. They say, well, I don't have my passwords. Well, those passwords are yours. Do you have a clear written information security policy to demonstrate a top-down culture of compliance? Do you have a remediation every 6 months to change the corporate culture and protect against phishing attacks? Does your technology provider have in-house cyber expertise? Just to give you a perspective, I would not want my dentist to review my cardiology report. Technology and cyber, while interrelated, are two different disciplines. They have to have an in-house cyber team. Does your technology provider conduct detailed background check on all of its employees? So, does it understand vendor relationships? Any of your third parties are also key elements to your overall sustainability and operational success. If you're breached, do you have a cross-functional CERT or incident response team to immediately respond and remediate threats? Do you have a post-threat assessment or partner that can manage the proper forensics, secure and contain information, evidentiary format in case legal proceedings? This is generally a specialized field which requires forensics and legal knowledge. So I know I covered a lot there, and those are things to consider. If you've answered no or I don't know to any or most of these questions I just asked, you're not alone, okay? But it does kind of demonstrate the extreme importance of taking a top-down security culture to protect and mitigate those threats, to protect and preserve your wealth preservation and family brand. So here's the security dilemma, and here's the kind of questions that people ask and they evaluate, right? And look, I just ran my own LLP. Warren runs his firm. We run our firm together. There's operational expenses. There's always a trade-off. So I want to look at this as a pragmatic way. There's a balance between managing the risk expense. Too much protection can overwhelm IT staffs, and budget risks can expose family offices to data theft. So there's a fine line between what you invest and the risk you're willing to take. But please keep this in mind. The cost of an attack can be high. Even a small attack on family office firm can mean hundreds of thousands of dollars in response costs. According to one of our insurance industry partners that provide cybersecurity, the average cost of a breach for a small professional service firm was $123,000. At large companies in the United States, the average cost of a cyber attack was $13 million. Clearly, there's a wide disparity there. Paying for experts to get invaders out of your computer is just the beginning. You'll get bills for cyber forensics, public relations, identity theft protection services for your customers, and the big legal bills to secure information in evidentiary format. The biggest risk may be reputational. Investors have learned to plan for risks of black swan event, which is a confluence of events seen as highly unlikely that nonetheless occurs with devastating consequences. For fund managers and family offices who depend on the trust of the world's most affluent and sophisticated investors, a cyber attack could trigger a breach that threatens the very existence of the firm. This is why family offices are currently being targeted. Here's the reality. Approximately 40% of family offices do not have a dedicated written information security policy in place. Unlike a traditional RIA, governance structures and guidelines relating to information security are generally more informal. There's a reason for the third year in a row that OC, the enforcement division of the SEC, has stated that cybersecurity directives and a strong security posture are among the top exam priorities for registered investment advisors. Here's my dilemma. If a fund endowment or other institutional investor was making an investment to a hedge fund, they would have 5 pages of due diligence questionnaires specific to technology and cyber protections to evaluate and investigate before a substantial allocation would even be considered. But all RIAs have to comply with 28 OC directives to prevent cybersecurity attacks. Why wouldn't a family office be held to the same benchmark of the firms they would invest in? Typically, there's underinvestment in the necessary technology systems. High-profile family offices become obvious targets due to the potential extortion value attached to reputational threats. This is a slide that I hope none of you see. I would like you to think about coming to work in the morning. However, this day is a little different. The front door you used to walk into is smashed. There's glass all over the place. The files have been turned upside down. You don't know what data was lost, stolen, where the threat is, where the people are, how is it activated. So this is something that is equivalent to ransomware. So one of the fastest growing and most pernicious class of attacks are known as ransomware schemes. Hackers scan the internet for vulnerable computers. When they gain access, they encrypt as much of the company's information as they want. Typically, employees turn on the machines one morning to find a message saying they can't use any of their files unless a payment, often the Bitcoin, is sent to an untraceable email address. These attacks could spread very quickly to companies of all sizes. WannaCry malware infected more than 230,000 computers worldwide in a single day. An attack linked to the North Korean government, MS Patch, that came out 3 months before could have prevented it. Payment authorization policy is another concern that I think is directly targeted to family offices. This is similar to how banks approve wires or other payments. Recent years have seen high volumes of family emails being hacked into, with thieves copying family member language and style to send requests purportedly from the family member for wire transfers. So another scam that goes unreported in family offices involved convincing an employee to transfer money to a bank account in some far-off country. Hackers tend to target accounting staff. Some just send fake invoices, others send emails that impersonate a CEO. We're seeing an increase in this sort of attack across our portfolio of clients among small and mid-sized family offices and investment funds. Human error leads to other problems as well. Despite years of warning, the vast majority of malware attacks are still triggered when an employee clicks on an email attachment. Social networking has fast become a preferred communication platform for both individuals and businesses, with sites such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter dominating the social media landscape. These platforms pose a significant risk to family offices, with organized criminal networks exploiting this space. Extracting with organized criminal networks is devastating reputational impact and even compromise the personal safety and security of family members. Please consider the following when looking at mails. Legit companies don't request your sensitive information via email. Legit companies usually call you by your name. Legit companies have domain emails. Legit companies know how to spell. Legit companies don't force you to their website. So then it comes into a picture of data responsibility, right? The data owner owns the liability and establishes the budget for protecting the data. Information security provides risk insight and mitigation information for the data owner to consider based on their own risk profile. Information technology team implements solutions and are the custodians of the data. So this is a coordinated effort that must be collaborated very clearly. For example, when we sit down and we provide a virtual CTO or virtual CISO, we think about what are the risk profiles of that entity? How can we help mitigate the immediate relevant threats? If you look at this particular slide, defense in depth, the strategy is focused on multiple layers of defense to protect against new and evolving threats. The framework also takes into account SEC's Office of Compliance of Inspections and Examinations, cybersecurity framework recommendations. It's important to note that each family office has its own risk profile. Therefore, each business must tailor its cybersecurity policies and procedures to its own security posture. So you could see that the conclusion here is that you need a confluence of different network applications, application layers, physical security, policies, procedures, and end user training to coordinate a significant threat mitigation to these attack vectors that are becoming more and more sophisticated every day. However, the most important element is the human, is you. So this is something that you really need to keep in mind in terms of remediation, how often that you engage and keep track of the new and evolving threats, what new attack vectors that you need to protect against now and in the future. And just to give you a little perspective, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and NIST provides a catalog of controls that support the development of secure and resilient federal information systems. These controls are the operational, technical, and management safeguards used by information systems to maintain the integrity, confidentiality, security, and federal information systems. So you can see in terms of identify, protect, and respond, and contain, there's a number of different variables that you need to consider to have a strong security posture. In closing, traditional families have relied on banks to exercise necessary governance and compliance requirements when it comes to protecting information and funds. But the time has come for families and family offices to take more responsibility for the protection of their own data with consideration to the entire documentation, the entire information and document workflow. Family offices need a clear written information security policy that has an equal weight of corporate code of conduct, that is supported at the highest levels of the firm and matches the firm investor profile and growth strategy with the understanding that cyber is fluid. Fundamental shifts in the way firms think about and integrate technology. It's people, process, technology, all working together in a systematic, cohesive, and repeatable way to protect and preserve your family reputation and investor trust. I thank you very much. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Warren, and please open it up for any questions.
Yep. So before I continue, Arthur, is there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, let's do that. It's really, that was super helpful, Don, by the way. You covered a lot of ground, but you did it in a way that I think it was consumed well. I suspect that others who are listening and others who are in the same position that I am as a family office, for example, have fallen into the trap of saying, wait a minute, I outsource everything. They presumably know what they're doing. And I'm protected because they presumably have their protections in place. And maybe when I hired them as a service provider, I did my research and determined that they have the protections. But I imagine that's a pretty deep trap that I've fallen into. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. You know, Arthur, it's very common and it's just human nature. I mean, the reality is that most people engage a third party, and that could be to protect their physical assets as well as their data and information technology assets. You know, who are the people that are, you know, cleaning out your office, right? Have they been vetted, right? It's just from a complete security protocol perspective. That's one of the biggest things or misconceptions that people have. And the way that you need to kind of validate them is just as a family office would take the appropriate level of due diligence to evaluate a hedge fund before they make an investment, or some sort of alternative asset firm before they make an investment. You need to provide those same due diligence standards to that vendor to ensure that they are in line, number one, with your security posture and protocol, that there's clear agreements about what their own cyber policies are, and that there is an alignment of direct interests in terms of mitigating any outside risk, right? So that would be my my response.
How do you feel about banks have, I guess, done a reasonably good job. Well, when I'm thinking while we're speaking, you know, my lawyer, my accountants, my third-party data provider that manages the inflow and outflow of position information for my asset management and my portfolio, those sort of things. How does one get to a point where, do they feign comfort in knowing that, or hoping that they've got it figured out? How does one get to a point to understand whether they figured it out or not?
I'm gonna let my colleague Warren kind of take that in terms of the next segment, because he's going to get into some more tactical level elements that I think will resonate very clearly with our audience.
Yeah, so Arthur, I think to answer your question before I start with the slide is that there's a continuous requirement to vet third parties, understanding about their security, understanding about their policies and procedures, understanding about their controls. No one is immune to any kind of cyber threats. The bigger companies were hit a long time ago. Obviously, you know, we hear about it because it's big news, and all of a sudden you hear a company like Mandiant or FireEye coming in for an incident response because someone was hacked, and then it goes back to the vendor. It could be an HVAC vendor, it could be a third-party vendor. So there's a whole chain of companies that need to be vetted properly. And for our clients today, we get compliance companies vetting us, and we're asked to vet their vendors, just because people need to understand the chain. And obviously there is a concern about protection, controls, users. We sometimes are training our vendors, users on cyber awareness. We'll do phishing exercises, we'll do security awareness training, just because we're so familiar with the types of things that are happening. It's a fluid market. So obviously we see this continually happening. It's never a restful situation. I think while I was going to work today, I heard on CNBC that the government is now considering opening up a ransomware division because of what's happening with Russia. So if anybody was listening to CNBC, probably I would think about 10:30, 11 o'clock, you heard them considering a division of the government starting to deal with ransomware. Just because of the sanctions last week in Russia, there's now concerns about ransomware. Ransomware could be combated against if you have controls. Obviously, you know, these larger companies, there's just so many people in these companies, you don't know who's touching what. So, I list here on this page, unless there's some more questions, we can just go through some of these ways to protect your family offices. There's never going to be a foolproof way. You got to continue with prevention, protect. And, if you look at this list now, there's 16 ways. If you look at this list 10 years ago, it would be one way, antivirus. So this market continues to evolve. We have a dedicated team of security analysts who look at products every day. We're seeing products from Israel. We're seeing products from all over the world, just to make sure that we're on top of different types of protection. We started using a product called Cyberfish out of Israel just because phishing was so ubiquitous. We had to figure out a way to stop it. So this company is using artificial intelligence, and basically, it could be one day ransomware, could one day be phishing, could one day be malware, spyware. So it doesn't stop. So the 16 ways here, obviously, we're not going to go through each one, but we've kept it on the screen for last 2 minutes per se. And I think if anybody has questions relating to these controls, we can certainly talk offline. But if someone said to us, which one should we choose if we only wanted to pick one? I would say probably the best answer is all 16. People need to budget enough money to protect their environment. If your environment is protected properly, obviously you're going to do everything you can to protect it. It's what you're protecting is your business. So we look at things like password controls. Don mentioned it earlier. Hard drive encryption. You lose your hard drive, you want that encrypted. Things like this have to continue. We encounter clients who haven't patched their machines for months, and that's because they just don't know, or the vendor they're using is not doing it. So
we have a question that's relevant to that topic, I think, if you don't mind.
Sure, please.
One of the things that I imagine you encounter regularly is that people have decided they didn't want to address this because it's too daunting, and an unknowable of how big of a project it would be just to look under the hood to see how bad one family office situation could be. And I know you will get to it eventually, but maybe you can touch on it a little bit now on, what's the process of, is it that painful to just do an assessment with you folks and see how vulnerable you really are? And is that a pain point that we can live with without feeling that the solution is so daunting that we don't want to do it?
Right. Great question. And the easy answer is it would probably take 2 or 3 hours to perform a risk assessment. It's a series of, let's say, 125 to 150 questions. And based upon those results, we would come out with a game plan. And those questions are going to talk about things like the controls you see here, physical security, how you back up your data, what type of policies and procedures are in place. And based upon a 2 or 3 hour investment, we'll come up with a scorecard. We'll come up with ratings, low, medium, high. We'll come up with a remediation plan. So yeah, it is a daunting task because nobody wants to invest those 2 or 3 hours. And if they get started, when they see the results, they're going to want to fix everything. So we've gone through these assessments. It's an interesting process, but there are companies out there that we use standard formats of questions. It could be under NIST, it could be under the SEC, it could be under FINRA. But again, it's a very thorough and comprehensive approach to your controls. And based upon those controls, we'll figure out, even if a company doesn't have these controls in place, like this other 15, we can immediately tell you yes or no whether you have all this. So again, Arthur, it's a daunting task, but it's a 2 or 3 hour investment of time, and someone needs to be willing to spend the time necessary.
I would argue that you just made it less daunting, because if I was to commence the process, I had to invest 2 hours, and because I had to discover some of the answers to the questions that I happen not to know, that's not too daunting. I would say that would cause me, I'm just speaking for myself, to feel better about engaging and not being so fearful of the process, because then aside from, things cost money, it's it's then you have an idea where you stand and how vulnerable you are for 2 hours. That doesn't sound.
Correct. And based upon that assessment, there is certainly a process that we walk through. So the initial investment is 2 to 3 hours. And then from there, depending upon the outcome, we can come up with a game plan. And I think that's the best approach. Again, if it's not daunting to you, everyone doesn't have that 2 hours. But if it's that important, which we believe it is, and we're here to tell you it is, it's certainly something that everyone should have on their mind. So that investment is just time. At the end of the day, we can come up with a game plan and obviously come up with an approach of how to remediate.
Yeah.
If you want to, is there any other questions we can answer, or
We have a couple more questions, but
Sure.
why don't you just continue and then I'll jump in because you might answer them.
Yeah. So we just listed here on this slide here, we listed some of the buzzwords for 2021. Every year there seems to be a buzzword. 2 or 3 years ago, you heard cloud. Maybe last year or the year before, you heard Office 365. Some of these things here people have heard of. Some of these things people don't know. But things like zero trust, that's going to be an interesting topic this year. Zero trust means that there's no one you can trust entering your network. There are tools out there that can actually put together a zero trust network. So anybody who's accessing your network, you'd have to have proper authentication, proper trust, and proper access to your network. So these things here, again, a lot of these things we're currently providing our client base. I just wanted to make sure people are aware. If we drop down to the last one, user behavior monitoring, we have tools that we can put on people's networks that if someone started to log in from outside of this country or multiple logins, yesterday the person was in Chicago, tomorrow the person's in China, or let's say the same login from 2 different areas in the world, we can figure out what's happening. From a perspective of data loss prevention, you can also look at user behavior and say, hey, by the way, why is someone printing on a Saturday? So there are things that we can do that can actually look at different types of controls and different types of anomalies. The screen here, we discussed at the beginning of this presentation about culture. Everyone has the same concerns about culture and how to bring cybersecurity to a forefront. Years ago, cybersecurity was basically sitting in the IT field. Nobody from the C-suite thought about it. Nobody from the patriarchs or whoever is running the firm says, hey, let's not discuss it. It's something that is part of the IT division. Today, it's becoming part of the C-suite just because of the vulnerabilities and the risks of what's out there. So again, we think starting in the C-suite and making it security relatable. What are the risks involved? Human-centric, again, making sure everyone's involved as far as who's at stake and who's at risk. I believe that even people's training should be continuous. Everyone can tell us, hey, look, by the way, I understand the concerns, but we do security awareness training maybe 10 times a month with different clients just because of the importance. And of course, investing in the right security tools. So that's a concern that people have. There are tools coming out every month. And again, working with ACE IT, we have a team of evaluation specialists who understand these security tools. If you want to jump to the next slide. Don mentioned this earlier in the presentation about policies. Certainly policies are important. Business, whether it's a business continuity plan or information security policy, every policy here has its own relevance. And basically it becomes part of a culture, it becomes part of a process, and people need to follow certain things. So again, whether it's a bring your own device policy, people realize that no one, now people are working from home, they may be working on their own computers. What is the policy on working on your own computer? If your son or daughter are using that computer and all of a sudden you're trying to access your bank and there's malware, how does that play out? Social media policy, what's being posted on your media pages. Let's say there are hackers looking and trolling on the networks of Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. They're going to understand what your wealth could be or understand where you live, and based upon the pictures that you're presenting or based upon vacations that you're putting on Facebook, they can put together a background and start to think about stealing your identity. So that's where a social media policy comes into play. Business conduct comes into play. So again, we can help with all these policies. We have people on staff who can write policies and procedures for our clients. Next slide. Don? Don, can you go to the next slide? Yep. So we put together a slide on cyber resilience versus cybersecurity. People look at cybersecurity and what is it all about? We understand cybersecurity is about reacting to a problem. The cyber resilience is more about anticipating and putting together a plan of attack or a plan of defense. Again, people work with firms like ourselves to come up with solutions, come up with how to protect your network, what should not be done. Again, we're continually educating our customers on cyber resilience versus cybersecurity. That's basically what we operate, how we operate, and what we operate with. And the next slide is also a better approach of what cyber resilience does. It's again, we're looking at architecting our clients' networks to figure out how to mitigate and how to resist and how to make sure that any hackers are being prevented from entering your network. So in closing, we've had a great discussion on cybersecurity. We are going to send out this deck. Obviously, Arthur is going to post it online. We're also going to make available to anybody from the family office FOI a best practices on information security, which lists most of the stuff that's in this PowerPoint, but it also gives better explanations. So we'll be happy to forward that over. So we appreciate the time today, and thank you so much for giving us the time.
Yeah, that was great. There's a couple questions. Is there aside from how I articulated it, a approach that you can engage somebody like me that's super chicken to find out what's really wrong, like a light version of, you still have to do the 2 hours to make the assessment, but is there a step by step, inch by inch way to solve the problems rather than trying to solve them all at once?
I think the information security PowerPoint, or not PowerPoint, PDF that we can send is 10 or 12 approaches. Instead of getting into that 2 or 3 hour conversation, we can have people look at that and say, okay, I don't have this in place. I don't have that in place. Because most people know they have antivirus. Do they have multi-factor? Do they have mobile device management? So, you have to start with the basic controls before you start putting in, we have people coming to us after a conference when conferences were plentiful years ago.
Things
they would say to us
to go to, yes.
Yeah. When they would say to us, look, I've just come out of this cybersecurity conference, we need a penetration test. And we'd ask some basic questions. Well, what about antivirus? What about password controls? Now, I've heard that's okay, but I really need a penetration test. So it's just a matter of questions about some of the controls. And, we don't want to have people go down the road unless they can get in the basic stuff. So again, to answer your question, it's basic questions that we can ask, just a conversation to have with people to understand where their posture is today. And that can help solve a lot of these problems. And once we start, it's going to continuous effort to help make this defense that much better.
Yeah, Don, your mute is on.
Juan, if I could just add to that as well, that goes back to my prior slide about, the balance about the investment and the risks, right? So a firm has to identify what they're willing to risk, right? Because the less investment you make, the bigger the breach and the more risk exposure you have. So if you're comfortable with that risk exposure, then you could find some moderation on that that's applicable to your current environment. As I mentioned, every family office that we've dealt with has their own ecosystem, right? There's always different variables about how a firm does this differently or that differently, even though they might be similar in size, scale, and scope in terms of AUM and disparate locations. So it's just a question of, at a corporate culture perspective, to align their risk profile with the proper threat remediation.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Can you share, without disclosing who it is, for example, a situation where you post, and it doesn't have to be a family office, it can be something similar, but post engaging you where you were able to demonstrate that you thwarted this threat, that threat, that you actually can demonstrate, maybe just anecdotally say now that, okay, because you went ahead and did what you needed to do, you were able to thwart this threat that would have otherwise got into the tent.
It's hard to pinpoint one. We're involved with so many different things. It could be backups that are not working. It could be patching that's not working. We've put in controls like security monitoring because people were concerned about all the threats that were attacking their network. It's just the amount of information that we see and the logs that we see and the kind of things that we are aware of that we can stop events. But anything that would come to mind more recently, people started working at home, obviously, because of COVID, the perimeter is gone. People would be concerned about remote access. They would, hey, look, I don't want to spend two more seconds logging in, but we installed multi-factor authentication. And people didn't want to refuse to change their passwords. Hey, I want to continue using the same passwords. Or we've put in dark web monitoring to understand if their passwords are being hacked and because they're looking at different websites or subscribing to third-party feeds that may have been hacked. So we've got a very simple product called ID Agent that does dark web monitoring. We can tell easily if a person is using, again, if that person's hacked because their name and their password is in the dark web, one phone call back to the user, and we had to actually find someone who was traveling on a plane. We waited for him to get off the plane to tell him, hey, change your password, because we were able to figure out from the dark web and the research that we've done and the monitoring reports that we have that his password was hacked. He didn't think about, when we told him originally, when we started working with the client and their users years before, he refused to change his password. He refuses to basically, have different passwords for different functions. And he unfortunately got hacked because one of the third-party feeds that he was subscribed to was hacked, and that continues to happen. So with a simple product like an ID Agent, dark web monitoring, we can pick up people that are unfortunately not aware of these different third-party feeds that are being hacked, but we can pick up information like that and call back clients and making sure that they're protected. So this is a continuous effort on a daily basis. We have to continue being vigilant, say something, see something, and this is continuously with even threats or crimes. We're seeing the same thing, and it's an interesting situation that we're in because we're constantly being called what if scenarios. People don't want to spend money, but when they're forced to, they do, and we don't want to see that with our clients. So a lot of this is education. A lot of this comes from security awareness training, and because of security awareness training, what's opened up people's eyes is to think about more controls and allowing more sensitivity to what's important to them.
Aside from the time it takes to do the questionnaire, what you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but what is it? And I know that there's probably a wide range of costs, but just to do the questionnaire and get the assessment, is that a low price point, medium price point, a couple hours of your staff's time? How does that work?
That for an engagement such as that, look, it requires a questionnaire, again, like we discussed before, but if the information is not available, some of these people may have other third parties controlling certain things. So there's questions that we need to ask. I would say an engagement like that could be under $5,000, and it's a one-time engagement. But again, it's because of collection of information, coming up with the assessment report, coming up with discussions on remediation plans. We may have to call third parties because of information not being available. But again, it all depends upon the engagement, what's available, and the information available. And we can certainly talk offline about some of the people's concerns about how to put this together.
Yeah,
Warren, if I could just add one thing to that, Arthur, I think it's important for people to also understand that not everything is a recurring cost, right? So in terms of integrating a corporate culture, right? If you think about a disaster recovery plan, a business continuity plan, a computer emergency response team plan, an incident response plan, those are all one-time costs. So once those costs are absorbed, you not only have a corporate culture that understands what those specific protocols are to follow in the event of a disaster, but at least you're starting somewhere where you don't have to incur the consistent recurring costs that are associated with MFA and some other applications. Now, for true defense in depth type of methodologies that need to be deployed, you obviously want to go through all of the elements that I kind of summarized on my slide, from the physical layer to a data layer and from educating the staff. So, it varies, but a lot of times people assume that everything is a recurring cost when it's not, where you can actually put a reasonable, process, protocol, procedure in place for a one-time investment and say, okay, now I get it. Once they see the level of detail that's there. Now, once again, if they choose not to implement something that is contained in a written information security policy now, maybe they do it later as they continue to grow. There's always that operational give and take. But I think, once again, that's where you need an assessment of what your independent risk profile is, and then working with a kind of trusted advisor, if you will, to evaluate the limit.
I think it's a very reasonable price point to not only make an assessment, but potentially get you on the right track. And then implement things, even a piecemeal as things go along, right? That may be a recurring cost.
Exactly.
That's what I was getting at. It's not that daunting of an engagement. It's, super reasonable, and, I would call it in the first line of insurance. I don't even know where I stand. So let me figure that out first, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
I think, Arthur, to your point, when there's insurance, let's say people are going out for insurance or cyber insurance, there's an application that's daunting. That could be 30 minutes or 40 minutes of someone looking at questions and saying, do I have these controls in place? By us doing that risk assessment, we'll be able to understand what gaps they have. So when they fill out that next application, that application is eased, and there won't be a concern about not getting that premium placed. Because like Don was saying earlier, we were speaking with an insurance broker 2 weeks ago, and because of that Microsoft Exchange issue about a month ago, and people, Microsoft has clients that are using Exchange in-house versus Office 365, so it's an on-prem Exchange server. And that's what the world had before Office 365 became prevalent. Microsoft found errors and found that to be hacked with SolarWinds type of environment. Insurance companies today are canceling or not even taking on new insurance if you do have an Exchange server in-house. Something that I was aware of. I was just shocked when I heard that. We had a client today that said to us, look, you told us to put in multi-factor. We didn't want to do it because it was 30 seconds more of someone's life that they needed to log in. And we told them it's 30 seconds, but it could be 10 seconds. It all depends upon how fast you want to hit your mobile device. And the application for their insurance policy, the premium is up. And basically they want to renew the insurance. The first question on the new application is, do you have multi-factor in place? So all the controls that we continue to talk about is going to come into play. And it's not because of ACE IT, it's just because of the way the market is in the climate.
Totally makes sense. Well, this has been super helpful. I've gotten notes from the audience saying that it's been helpful to them as well. And so thank you, Don, and thank you, Warren. You want to have a last wrap-up comment, Don, before we run off?
I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and we hope that you have a takeaway here to, give considerable thought to what we presented. If there's any follow-up online that you would like to do in a more confidential nature, we'll make ourselves available to do that. But I wanted to extend a heartfelt thank you and sincere thanks to everyone participating today, and we hope you found it helpful.
Warren?
Same here. Thank you so much, Arthur, for allowing us to participate and to present on cyber. Hopefully everyone gained a lot of insight and knowledge about where the cyber market is in the landscape.
There's
But we're
been-
here to help.
We hope to see you again too. And for the record, we're going to make sure that everybody gets in touch with Dawn directly. And thank you guys. That was awesome. Super appreciated. And thank you, as I always say, for spending the only thing you can't make more of, and that's your time with us this afternoon. Until next time, take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.